It's not enough that my family got out. Unfortunately, the world lost a phenomenal person the other day. His name was Harav Yeshaya Yaakov Portugal of Skulen, the Skulener of Bar Park. And he was such a phenomenal human being that thousands came out to give him honor after his passing. Now, my life was impacted by him and by his entire family, so I want to share with you a little bit about my story and about the Skulener story itself. So my story is that I became religious when I was a teenager, and I moved to New York from out of town, and I was just kind of floating around. I didn't really find my place. But I knew one thing. I wanted to make my way into the Chasidic world, but all the doors seemed closed to me. So anytime I met a person, I would ask them, is there somebody that you know of that might be able to help me? And one day I was given the phone number of Harav Yeshaya Yaakov's sister, and I called her up and I told her, I said, you know, I would like to live with a Chasidic family. So it was during supper time when I called. The kids were in the background, and she was so nice. She was so warm, and she made time for me. She said, come over to my house. I want to get to know you. So I went to her house, and we schmoozed, and we hit it off right away. And what she ended up doing was she rebuilt her basement, which was an unfinished basement apartment, in order that I should have a place to live. I lived together with her and her family, and they treated me basically like I was a daughter. They helped me find my husband. I got engaged. I actually had my engagement party in the Skulen Rebbe's living room, sorry, his dining room actually. And I became very, very close with the family. They paid for my wedding. They made sure I had the finest of everything. I had high quality furniture. I had beautiful clothing. They spent thousands and thousands of dollars to make sure that I was set up very honorably. And I kept telling them, I'm like, I don't need this. I'm a very simple person. I don't need fancy things. But they were so concerned with my feelings. They said, you know, you're a Baal Teshuva, you don't have a strong community, you don't have a huge family. We want to give this to you. We want to make sure you feel very good with yourself. So they made sure that I was really set up in style. And the day of the wedding itself, it was unbelievable. We had a small wedding hall, but it was packed to the brim. Not only my husband's friends and his family, but the entire Skulener community came out, and it was rocking away. It was unbelievable. And everybody treated me with such dignity. Rabbi Yeshaya Yaakov and his brothers and his brothers-in-law, they actually danced in front of me as if I were their own niece. So I had the Skulen Rebbe dancing in front of me. It was an incredible honor. And after my wedding, I maintained the connection very strongly. And even though I no longer am exactly the same as the Skulener community, keeping the customs in exactly the same way that they are, I have a different view of Judaism these days. I still have a very close bond with them. I love them. I respect them very much. And they too respect me as well. So they're just a phenomenal, phenomenal family. And let me tell you a little bit about their history. The Skulener dynasty began with Harav Yeshaya Yaakov Portugal's grandfather, Harav Zisya Portugal, who inherited the mantle of leadership from his own father when his own father passed away when Harav Zisya Portugal was only 17 years old. This was in the town of Skulen in what is now Moldova. And Harav Zisya Portugal and his Rebbetzin Sheni Ruchel, they took over the town of Skulen. But they ended up moving to the city of Chernovich when their own rabbi, the Sadegari Rebbe, came over to them and said, you know, Rabbi Zisya, I think you would be much more successful in the city of Chernovich, so I think you should move there. So the Portugal family, they picked up and they moved to Chernovich, and it ended up saving their lives because in July 1941, the Nazis came to the city of Skulen and they had the villagers dig a mass grave, and they murdered them, 300 people with more than 100 children. But the Portugal family had moved away, and they were in Chernovich, and they were able to continue the Skulener dynasty from the city of Chernovich. Now, Chernovich had a special blessing that was given to it by the Ber Mayim Chaim, who was a very righteous person. And he blessed the city of Chernovich that during an Eis Tzara, during a time of suffering, the city of Chernovich should suffer less than the surrounding areas. And this blessing came to fruition because during the war, Chernovich was not affected as drastically as the surrounding areas. And many people escaped the Holocaust and they came to the city of Chernovich, and many war orphans actually found their way to the Portugal household, which had its doors wide open for anybody. So the Portugals, they ended up taking in between 60 to 70 war orphans during the time that they lived in Chernovich. And after they lived in Chernovich, they ended up moving to Bucharest. And at that time, the war was finishing, And war orphans were trickling in from all over the place. So of course the Portugal said, these are Jewish children, we have to help them. And at that point in time, there was also tremendous blessing because Rebbetzin Sheni Rachel had been gifted years beforehand a huge sum of money by her sister, who had been very well-to-do. Her sister had come to visit her when they were still back in Skulen, and she saw the way that this young couple was living, and they didn't have much furniture or anything. So Rebbetzin Sheni Rachel's sister said, you know what, I want to give you some money. Go buy yourself good furniture, buy yourself Persian carpets to make sure that the house is nice and warm. You know, buy thick curtains. So Rebbetzin Sheni Rachel took the money and she packed it away. And she's like, I don't know what kind of furniture I want. So she held on to that money. She took out this money after the war and she went and she bought wagonfuls of potatoes and flour. And she just started baking and cooking for everybody. She's like, if you're hungry, come and eat. If you need a place to sleep, come and sleep. And the Portugal family ended up adopting more than 1,000 children in the days following World War II. Now, these children, of course, couldn't all fit inside of their houses. They already had 60 to 70 children living with them from the days of Chernovich. But in Bucharest, they realized that they needed much, much more room. So they ended up purchasing a building for boys and a building for girls. And they also opened up a school. Now, this was a religious school, and the children learned about Judaism. But there was also another school that was in the town of Bucharest, and that was a Zionist school for Jewish children. And it was very interesting. These two schools started out as competition, but over time, one by one, the children transferred over to the religious school after they saw how geschmack, how delicious it was. There was so much singing, there was so much happiness, and they said, you know what, we want to be over there. In Skulen, everything was about helping these children to flourish. And there was actually a group of orphans that arrived in the Portugal household shortly before Passover, which is a very, very busy, very intense time of cooking and cleaning and getting rid of all the leavened products. But these children, they arrived at the Portugal house at this time, and they said, 1 second, but we didn't celebrate Purim. How can we celebrate Passover without celebrating Purim? Now, Purim is a holiday that is kind of like the nightmare of the days before Passover, because it's full of leavened food and it's busy and it's hectic and everything. But the Rebbetzin saw that these children were emotionally distraught. They had just gone through the Holocaust. And she said, you know what, these children need Purim. Even though this holiday already passed and Passover was on the horizon, she rolled up her sleeves, she started baking hamantash and these leavened cookies, and she prepared them costumes, and she just made sure that they had everything that they could be as emotionally settled as possible. Because that's who the Portugal family is. So these children were raised up with incredible love by the Portugal family, and they took the name Portugal upon themselves unless they had their own last name that they knew and that they wanted to carry on with them. Now, the Romanian government was keeping an eye on all these activities, and they did not like it. Harav Leizezisya Portugal was a very powerful person, and he was respected, but what was not respected was Judaism. Now, Harav Leizezisya Portugal had been given a special dispensation during the war that if somebody was really important to the Chernovich community, then he could have given them a title that would prevent them from being, taken away and murdered. So, of course, Harav Leizezisya Portugal, he found something really important, an incredible job that every single person was needed for, and they weren't able to take anybody away. So this power that the rabbi had, combined with the children that he was saving and the Judaism that he was teaching, it made him very unbeloved by the Soviets. And moreover, they saw that not only were just children trickling into them, but he was actually going out to get children. You see, at that time, there were trains that were arriving constantly into Bucharest. And every day there would be children coming from all around Europe, and they would just be trying to find family. So the Portugals would every day be down at the train station together with a bunch of other people, and each of them would grab a child and say, oh, this is my niece, this is my nephew, this is my, whatever it is. Because the law was, if a family member claimed an orphan child, then the communist government could not take them. So they went out to save every single Jewish child. Because a Jewish child being taken away from Judaism is an absolute tragedy. And the communist government that was trying to present itself as a non-communist government wanted nothing more than to destroy the Jewish soul. In fact, the Romanian government at that time allowed Judaism to be practiced openly. They allowed the synagogues to be open. They allowed people to dress Jewishly, but people would just randomly disappear from the community. Children would be kidnapped, and they would be sent to re-education camps, where they would be psychologically and physically broken to the point that they accepted communism upon themselves. So the communist government wanted to stop the Portugals from spreading Judaism, and they tried to find every way to incriminate the Portugal family. They said they were spies. And there were many times that Harav Lezer himself was imprisoned, but also his son, Harav Yisrael Avraham, and his wife, Rebbetzin Rezel, were also imprisoned. Now, Rebbetzin Rezel was actually imprisoned during the first year of her marriage when she was pregnant with Harav Yishai Yaakov Portugal, the person who we mentioned at the very beginning who just recently passed away. She was imprisoned when she was pregnant, and they beat her so viciously that it's a miracle that she did not miscarry. But she did become crippled from that point on. So throughout the years, the Rebbes would be taken and imprisoned. The very last time they were imprisoned, both the Rebbes were picked up, both the father and the son, in 2 different locations. And Harav Yisrael Avraham was picked up from his house in the middle of the night. He was ripped out of his bed. The Rebbetzin that I lived with, she watched her father being ripped from his bed in the middle of the night. And she remembers her father telling her, Kinderlich daven, daven, pray that we should be reunited, because he didn't know if he was ever coming back. Because that's how it would go sometimes. People would just disappear and they would never come back. She was around 9 years old at the time. And for 6 months, they didn't hear from the Rebbes. She didn't hear from her father. She didn't hear from her grandfather. Nobody knew if they were dead or alive. And it was a very, very traumatic, very scary time. Now, when they took Harav Yisrael Avraham, they took him and they threw him into a car, and they had 3 people sitting on him, one on his head, one on his back, one on his legs. And they sat that way for a very long time, and they drove around and around and around. In the end, come to find out, they only went a few blocks away, but they were trying to create a psychological torture. And at the same time, he felt like he was suffocating, that he couldn't breathe underneath it. So the Rebbes were taken into this deep, dark dungeon where there was no artificial light, and there were no windows. And they were put down there for 6 months, from Rosh Chodesh Nisan until Shabbos Nachamu. And during this time, they were separated. And it was very hard for them to keep track of time. And they were only able to keep track of time just by monitoring when the guards were changing. So they were able to get a rough estimate of time. Now, both of these Rebbes, even though they were separate, they were both completely committed to God, to Judaism, and they knew that they were not going to give up an ounce of their Judaism. So both of them ended up keeping Shabbos for 2 days because they couldn't know if their calculations were correct or not. Moreover, during the time that they were imprisoned, they didn't have access to kosher food. So both of them subsisted off of a single sugar cube and a little bit of matzah that they had, that they rationed throughout the 6 months of their being imprisoned. So when they both came out, they were both extremely frail, extremely emaciated. And Harav Lezer Portugal, he was so emaciated that his kapel, his yarmulke, his head covering, actually fell all the way down to his nose because he had lost so much weight. Now, while they were imprisoned, they were also beaten, they were also tortured in order to try to get them to crack, to admit that they were spies, or to admit that other Jews were spies. Now, Harav Lezer Portugal, he was treated a little bit less intensely, but his son was treated very, 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 very badly, to the point that many times he thought that his neshama was just going to go out. They would do things like they would smash his head repeatedly against a cement wall. They would take his hands, they would slam a door on top of his fingers. And there was one time that they were beating him so viciously with these wide leather straps that he was down on the floor, and he thought he was going to die. So he raised his hand for a second, and he raised his hand just so he could get a breath of air. But they thought, okay, he finally is going to crack. And when they realized that he's not saying a word, he will never implicate another Jew, then they told him, they said, not even your ashes will be going back home. And they continued to viciously beat him. Thank God he survived that encounter. And at that moment that he thought his soul was going out, he was actually given from God a beautiful niggin called Bidchu B'Hashem that is well known in Skulen circles and is sung until this day. And that's one thing that Harav Yisrael Avraham was known for. He used to always carry a tape recorder with him because he would always have these very, very holy nigunim that would come down, and he would just sing these beautiful, beautiful songs. And there are many hundreds of them that are recorded for posterity in Skulener circles, and they're really, truly very, very beautiful. So how did the Skulener Rebbes end up getting released? What was Hashgacha Pratis? What was the divine providence that took place in order for them to return home to their families? So while they were imprisoned, there was an American Jew named Rabbi Harry Bronstein that was on his way to Russia, and he was going to perform circumcisions there. But he had heard about the very holy Skulen Rebbe, and he wanted to come visit him. So he made sure to stop in Romania on his way, and he wanted to spend Shabbos there together with the Skulener community. So he lands in Romania, and he heads over to the family's house, and he shows up at the door, and Rebbetzin Razel opens the door, and she's like, okay, you're an American. Do the authorities know that you're here? Do you have permission to be here? She was very scared because they were already being, called spies, and then an American should show up at the door. That would seem very highly suspicious. And, they were under such scrutiny at that point in time that even the neighbors wouldn't come directly into their house except for during prayers. They would all walk all the way around the block so that they wouldn't go anywhere near the Portugal house, because that's how high the danger was. But the Jewish people would always daven together with a minyan, so during davening times, everybody would come running in, and they would go running back out as quick as they could. So Rabbi Harry Bronstein, he didn't realize what a significant danger he posed to the Portugal family with his American passport, and he actually ended up getting arrested a short while later, and he spent the Shabbos evening in jail, and he was interrogated by the Romanian guards, and when they realized that he had no prior connection to Skulen and he was really speaking the truth, they let him go, and they allowed him to go spend Shabbos morning davening together with the Skulener community. So Rabbi Bronstein, he went into the shul, and Rebbetzin Razel saw him come in, and she picked up a siddur, a prayer book, and she opened it up, and she was standing and watching everything, pretending to pray. Really, she was looking for a moment in which she could communicate with Rabbi Bronstein. She could tell him what was happening. So Rabbi Bronstein, he's looking around, and he's like, okay, where's this Rebbe that I came to see? And he's looking, and he doesn't see him, and he doesn't know what's going on, but the community is davening, and they get up to the bracha of Mater Servim, which is to release the bound, and everybody starts bawling. They're crying, and he realizes that something's going on. So he sees Rebbetzin Razel, and he inches his way over to her, and they're standing next to each other, both of them pretending to pray, but they're really whispering to each other. And she tells him the whole story, that her husband and her father-in-law were both imprisoned in a Romanian prison. And he understands that he has to do something. So Matzah Shabbos, when he left Skulen, he ended up flying to England, and he made such a ruckus that the world could not ignore it any longer. And actually, I think the Secretary General of the UN, Dag Hammarskjöld, I can't say the name, he actually ended up getting involved, and he put such pressure on Romania. He told them, he said, you better release this Portugal family, get them out of Romania, otherwise there is going to be a price to pay. So Romania ended up taking it seriously, and they actually let both Skulen Rebbes go. But they had to make sure to torture them up until the last minute. So first off, they came to them actually on Shabbos, and they told them, they said, it's Shabbos, and you have to sign your release paperwork. But of course, the Rebbe said, no, it's Shabbos. We don't sign on Shabbos. They held true to their Judaism. It didn't matter if they were going to be released. They said, we'll wait a little longer here in this horrible prison, but we are not breaking God's commandments. So they didn't. They ended up being released on a Monday, happens to be. But when they were released, they were taken outside after being in a dark dungeon for 6 months, and they were pushed outside in the middle of the day when the sun was at its brightest, just to make sure they had a little bit more moment of torture when their eyes had to try to adjust to this. Thank God, a Jew passing by found them, and he had a car, and he put them in the car, and he drove them home, and the Skulen Rebbes were reunited with their families. And 1 year from the time that they were imprisoned, by that time they were packed up, they were ready to go, they were out of Romania, and as soon as the plane landed in Budapest, Harav Lezisi, Portugal, he got off the plane, and he asked for a telephone the very first thing there in the airport, and he started making calls. He said, it's not enough that my family got out. He said, I need every single Jew to be able to leave Romania, and he put such pressure on Romania that all the Jewish people who lived in Romania, whether they were religious or not religious, were given the choice of if they wanted to stay in Romania or not. And this was a tremendous salvation for Romanian Jewry who was suffering at that time. Now, the Portugal family ended up moving to America, and they have the beautiful Skulen dynasty there. The brothers are spread out, and they continued taking care of people the same way that they took care of them in Romania. Nowadays, there are two very well-known organizations. One of them, I guess, more well-known than the other one, that are run by Skulen. So one of them is called Chasidic, and that is an organization that helps to outfit brides. They give them everything that they need, the same way that I was given. They give them furniture, they give them clothing, they give them whatever it takes to establish a household in an honorable fashion. The other organization is called Chasidic, and it's in Eretz Yisrael in Israel, and it is a orphanage system that takes in children that even the government feel that they can't handle, children who were drug addicted, children who suffered extreme abuse, children who were so problematic that the government says, these kids are just too hard, we don't know what to do with them. So Skulen says, we're not giving up on anybody. We take them all. Every single Jewish child is a precious soul unto themselves. And they take them in, and they raise them up, and they marry them off. And it's truly an unbelievable organization. So what I want to tell you is that if you want to know how I was treated by the Chasidic community, specifically by the Skulen Chasidic community, I would just tell you that I have never experienced such incredible kindness. I'm not going to say that the community doesn't have problems. Every community has problems, and there are things that need to be worked on. There are ideologies that might need to be straightened out. But overall, chesed, kindness, that's the overriding factor inside of the Chasidic community as I have been exposed to it. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.